Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1941 Hellzapoppin, directed by H.C. Potter. Every so often I'll run across a film that just completely takes me by surprise, like The Devil and Miss Jones or Borderline. In the former case it was a pleasant surprise, and in the latter case it was an overwhelming sense of total confusion, since I couldn't figure out what the hell the movie was supposed to be, a comedy or a drama. Then there are movies that I know are going to be, movies that I know going in are going to be absolutely insane, and not in a good way, such as The Creeping Terror, The Beast of Yucca Flats, or From Hell It Came. If you're a regular viewer of this show, you'll be familiar with all the movies I mentioned, since they've probably been repeated a dozen or so times. In the case of movies like The Beast of Yucca Flats, I'm starting to think that the station is just repeating that one to see, in order how many times they could show it before I start getting death threats. To forestall that eventuality, I'm in the process of ferreting out more movies to show, and I'm trying to show ones that are at least marginally better than the crap I've shown in previous episodes. I think I'm succeeding. Of course, you're hearing this from someone whose taste in movies runs the gamut from, horrendous to merely projectile vomit-inducing, so you can take that for what it's worth. Tonight's movie, Hellzapoppin, is an example of one of the more bizarre films you're likely to see on this show, and when I say that, it's in a good way. I can honestly say that I have never seen a movie quite like this one. Originally an insanely freewheeling 15-scene touring stage play with a 75-member cast entitled Everything Goes, Hellzapoppin got its name when the comedy team that started it, Olsen Johnson, appeared at an annual festival in Buckeye, Arizona, which the town called Hellzapoppin, with one L. Ole Olsen and Chick Johnson took a shine to the name and asked the town fathers for permission to rename their traveling revue Hellzapoppin, and the entire town, who loved the show, responded in the affirmative. No two performances of Hellzapoppin were the same. In his excellent book, Movie Comedy Teams, from which I got just about every bit of information I'm imparting here, Leonard Maltin describes the show thusly. One evening a musical number might appear before intermission. The next evening it could be at the finale. And another performance it might not be used at all. The show was a completely freewheeling madcap comedy with no holds barred. Every night a man would come in late to a special orchestra seat and take off his overcoat. A hanger would suddenly sail down from the ceiling, the man would nonchalantly hang up his coat, and the hanger would zip back up into the heavens. Audience members were sometimes drawn into the fun, but Olsen and Johnson were careful not to embarrass them, saving the rough jokes for cast members. One night, by accident, an exception was made. Volunteers were selected for a Coney Island funhouse scene, and a dozen people went up on the stage. Most were members of the cast. One gag would have a chorus girl wearing a wide skirt step over an air blower which would billow her skirt into the air. In this particular performance, an elderly lady from the audience had the misfortune to step over the blower, and when her dress was lifted, her reaction was swift and violent. She took her umbrella and started beating everyone in sight. The response was so uproarious that Olsen and Johnson decided to keep the gag in the show, using a cast member instead of an unsuspecting lady for all future performances. Olsen's restaurant on 40th Street was kind of an extension of the show, with crazy gags greeting the customers on all sides. I'd give anything to be able to go back to that time and experience the insanity of that show as it was originally presented. John Sigvard Ole Olsen was born on November 6, 1892 in Peru, Indiana. The son of Norwegian immigrants, his original ambition was to become a concert violinist. He worked his way through Northwestern University playing fiddle for a quartet in a local restaurant. In 1914, the pianist in Olsen's band quit and was replaced by Chick Johnson. As Olsen remembered, he wore side-button yellow shoes, and he was the first man I ever heard imitate a busy signal on the telephone. I knew I had to have him as a partner. Harold Ogden Johnson, known as Chick, was born on March 5, 1891 in Chicago, Illinois. He attended the Chicago Musical College studying classical piano. After leaving college, he found nightclub work as a ragtime pianist, eventually joining Olsen's quartet. After becoming partners, they split from the quartet and hit the vaudeville circuit as a musical duo, soon discovering that the real money lay in making people laugh. They would draft stage hands into their comedy bits and soon hired full-time actors to tour with them. They were soon working for the Pantages vaudeville circuit and then jumped to the Keith Orpheum circuit, where they were soon making $2,500 a week. By the 1920s, they were headliners, touring the country and displaying their unique brand of insanity everywhere they went. One of their recurring gags was Chick blowing off a shotgun filled with blank shells into the rafters, and a chicken would fall to the stage. Ole would grimace and comment, "It's a good thing cows don't fly," at which point a cow would plummet to the platform. The team also had success on the radio and eventually built such a large company that they survived the collapse of vaudeville. They continued touring the big cities, but always had the most success in small towns they visited, crediting their success to the many friends they made while touring the States. They inevitably landed in Hollywood, but instead of going with the tried and true formula the pair had created and won success with for so long, Hollywood, in all their wisdom, insisted that a love interest be shoehorned into the films they made, which brought the stories, as they usually do, to a grinding halt. You'll see ample evidence of this in Hellzapoppin, although they still managed to fit a couple of gags into some of the musical numbers. After making a few films in Hollywood, they returned to the vaudeville circuit and made their Broadway debut, replacing Jack Haley and Sid Silvers in the show Take a Chance. 2 years later, the Roxy Theater in New York booked their review Everything Goes instead of the usual vaudeville bill. They changed the name of the show to Hellzapoppin soon after this. They did a couple of movies for Republic Pictures and then returned to the vaudeville circuit, and in 1938, Broadway impresario Lee Schubert was persuaded to attend a performance of Hellzapoppin in Philadelphia. After seeing the wild audience reaction to the show, he offered Ole and Cheek the chance to bring their review to Broadway. He hired the entire troupe and insisted that the show be expanded from its original 1-hour length. The team were happy to oblige, and Hellzapoppin premiered on Broadway on September 22, 1938. The state opening night audience was taken completely off guard by the insane show, and the response was tremendous. The critics more or less slagged the show off, but Walter Winchell, who at that time was the most powerful columnist in the country, loved the show and decided to promote it. The show ran for 1,104 performances on Broadway. And ironically, the picture opens with Olsen and Johnson arguing with their director that the show doesn't need any changes. They've been doing it on Broadway for 2 years, and they know it works as it is. Unfortunately, the director in the film doesn't pay any attention to their advice, and the insanity of the play is seriously toned down in deference to the established Hollywood formula. That's not to say it vanishes completely. There's more than a normal dose of insanity in the movie, and it's still funny, but I would have loved to see the original stage play again. There are a few recognizable faces in the film, however, like a very young Martha Ray, and a standby comic that did an enormous amount of work separate from the trio he was best known for performing with, Shemp Howard. Martha Ray was born Margaret Teresa Yvonne Reed on August 27, 1916 in Butte, Montana. Nicknamed the Big Mouth for obvious reasons, she was born backstage in a vaudeville theater where her parents, Pete Reed and Maybelle Hooper, were performing. 2 days after Martha was born, her mother was performing again. Martha and her brother Bud were incorporated into the act when they were old enough and stole the show so often that the name of the act was changed from Reed and Hooper to Bud and Margie. She later remembered, "I didn't have to work till I was 3, but after that I never stopped." She had so little formal schooling, in fact, that she had to have her scripts read to her. In the early 30s, she sang with a couple of orchestras and appeared in 83 movies and television shows during her long career, but spent most of it entertaining American troops overseas while touring with the USO and Bob Hope. She won the Jean Herschel Humanitarian Award in 1969 for the work she did for charity and entertaining troops, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1993, and was made an honorary Green Beret by the U.S. Special Forces, in addition to being a registered nurse with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, helping out in A camps when things got bad. She was affectionately known by the troops as Colonel Maggie. Oddly, for someone who traveled as much as she did, she had a lifelong terror of flying and would only fly if she were in an alcoholic stupor. Her behavior during these trips resulted in her being banned from a number of airlines. On August 14, 1956, after suffering numerous personal problems, her 5th divorce, and the cancellation of her TV variety show, she attempted to commit suicide by taking an overdose of pills. After recovering at the Sisters of St. Francis Hospital, she would always end her TV programs by saying, "Good night, little sisters," in honor of the nuns at the hospital who helped her survive. Martha Raye died of pneumonia on October 19, 1994 in Los Angeles, California. Shemp Howard was born Samuel Horowitz on March 4, 1895 in Brooklyn, New York. He and his younger brothers, Harry Moses and later Jerome, otherwise known as Moe and Curly, teamed up with a wild-haired young violinist named Louis Feinberg and a vaudeville comic named Ted Healy. Healy, a talented comic, was unfortunately also an alcoholic and would turn violent when drunk. Shemp left the act for Hollywood in 1930 after getting an offer to play Nobby Walsh in the Joe Palooka series. He starred in a series of short race films that leaned heavily on his Jewish heritage and appeared as supporting characters in many features, in addition to doing a series of shorts in which he was partnered with Billy Gilbert. After Curly suffered a series of strokes in the mid-40s, Shemp rejoined Moe and Larry and continued to appear in Three Stooges shorts until he died of a heart attack in the back of a taxi after attending a boxing match on November 22, 1955. Shemp is often referred to as the forgotten stooge and considered less of a comedian than his brother Curly. I do not agree with this at all. While Curly was a wonderful comic and was pretty much irreplaceable, Shemp was just as funny in his own way and wisely did not attempt to imitate Curly when he rejoined the team. This was a thankless task, but to me, he was just as funny as Curly. It's just in a different way. He was an amazing physical comic, as you'll see if, for instance, you watch his body movement when challenging a usually larger opponent to a fist fight that he invariably loses. He was also an excellent improvisational comic and often made scenes he was in funnier than they were written. By the way, Shemp got his name from his mother. She had a very heavy Yiddish accent, and when she called to him, her accent made the name Sam sound like Shemp, so his family started calling him that. Although it's only a ghost of the original production, Hellzapoppin is a crazy movie, and it could be argued that it's the inspiration for the films of the Zucker-Abrams-Zucker team, like Airplane and Hot Shots. There's even a scene in the film that's reminiscent of one of my favorite shows, Mystery Science Theater 3000. That's not bad company to be in. Before we begin, there's a sequence in the movie I should mention, and a bunch of performers I feel should be singled out for special attention. The dancers who performed the Lindy Hop number about halfway through the movie are the Harlem Congaroos, who originally started out in 1939 as Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, appearing at the Cotton Club and other nightclubs all over the country. They also appeared in the Soundy Hot Chocolates. Just so you know, a Soundy was a short sound film made at the onset of the sound era that ran 5 minutes or so and highlighted musical acts. Their performance is one of the highlights of the movie and the thing that made me seek it out to begin with. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Hellzapoppin', right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.